Humanity isn't just a collection of individuals. We are a part of an unfolding story of consciousness and evolution. When we reflect on our origins as an earthling species, we gain perspective beyond our immediate struggles and a deeper sense of purpose and interconnectedness. In order to know where we're going as a species, do you think it's important for earthlings to know where we came from? In the Western world, many of us know little of our family history past our grandparents, maybe great grandparents. We seem to be losing more and more touch with our ancestors and our lineages. Is this an issue? Is understanding our lineages helpful to us in navigating our existence today? Let's explore a very old story our ancestors preserved for us, a story that has been preserved across continents and cultures for thousands upon thousands of years. In 2013, I spent a few weeks in Turkey exploring several areas of this absolutely fascinating country. For someone like me who is an avid student of ancient history and ancient civilizations, this was a dream come true. So while in Turkey, there was a lot of buzz surrounding a geological formation discovered in an area of eastern Turkey. Here, some researchers believe they may have uncovered the petrified remnants of one of history's most legendary vessels, Noah's Ark. This intriguing site is known as the Drupanar Formation. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about this discovery. Just to be clear, this video isn't about proving whether the Drupanar Formation, which has not been excavated and has only been studied with ground-penetrating radar, is actually Noah's Ark or not. Rather, we're going to explore an ancient story left to us by our ancestors, a story that is a part of all lineages, a story found across countless cultures and continents left to us by our ancestors. Did you know that nearly every culture has a story about the Great Flood? One of the strongest pieces of evidence for some sort of global flood that annihilated almost all people on Earth, except for some sort of chosen family or families, has been the abundance of flood legends from around the world. I mean, these flood legends are everywhere, and the stories are all so similar. There might be slight differences when examining each culture's story, but for the most part, it's the same story. And the story goes, humans were either created by a god or multiple gods, depending on what story you're looking at. And something ends up happening to upset the gods or god that leads to the Great Flood. The flood is usually some sort of retaliation sent by the god or gods, some sort of retribution. In other words, the god or gods were mad at the humans and they were looking to punish us. In pretty much all of the flood stories, some sort of chosen family or cultural hero is present. The oldest flood legend I can find is in these ancient 1600 BC Sumerian texts that were written on clay tablets. I've read it, and the story is quite bizarre. Humans were created by this sort of organization of gods. The gods in the story are more like higher level beings rather than the great I am. And this god named Enlil is one of its leaders. So Enlil kind of leads this organization of gods after the gods had a conflict amongst themselves. The conflict started because these higher level gods were having lower level gods do manual type labor work on our planet because they needed some of our precious metals that we have here. The lower level gods eventually retaliated against this strenuous earth labor. So this organization of gods decided to create a race of earthlings to be used as sort of a slave race to help cultivate the precious metal on the planet. One of the gods took clay, mixed it with blood, and added a touch of cosmic water, bringing us earthlings to our life forms. When us humans awoke, one of the gods handed us a carrying basket and taught us how to work for the gods. This all went well for a while, but fast forward about 1,200 years later, and human beings had multiplied to such an extent that we disturbed the gods with all of our noise. We were really loud and obnoxious, and the gods could no longer take it anymore. The text even says that the gods residing in the upper part of heaven couldn't even sleep anymore due to all of our noise. The entire second tablet of these ancient texts is about the unstoppable increase in human population. The god Enlil, who remember is someone in charge, becomes enraged and orders that a mighty flood should consume all of humanity. This other god named Enki is kind of a human sympathizer. He does not want the humans to be killed off, but Enlil makes Enki swear before the council of gods called the Anunnaki that he would not speak a word of these extermination plans to the humans. Enki swore he would not tell the humans of these plans, but he was upset. He was upset that this was going to be done to us humans, that we were going to be wiped out, killed off. There was this respected priest among the humans, and Enki goes to this priest's house and starts speaking loudly to a wall about the god's plans to wipe out the humans. He doesn't tell the human priest directly, but rather speaks loudly to a wall, so technically he doesn't break the promise to not inform the humans of the flood. Enki tells this wall about the plans and gives direction to the wall on how to build a ship and what should be brought on the ship. The wise priest overhears Enki's warning and direction, so he gets started building a ship, gathering food, supplies, animals. The priest was really stressed out while doing all this. The text even says that he was like dry heaving through a portion of it. This was a matter of survival. The priest followed Enki's instructions, and him and his family were saved when the gods flooded the earth. Now, many of the gods expressed regret after killing off most of the humans. Enlil, however, was pretty mad when he found out what Enki did to save some of the humans. The gods decided to come to an agreement for a future solution, ensuring that this wouldn't happen again. In order to prevent overpopulation, the gods made some alterations to us earthlings. Some human women would be made barren. Some human women would either not survive childbirth or their children would not survive childbirth, and some children would die in infancy. Making some women barren or having some women die in childbirth or having their children die either in the womb or in infancy would hopefully help ensure that the gods would have sufficient space on earth without the overpopulation of humans. A little dark, I know, but hey, so is the version in Genesis. Many people out here, at least in the West, are familiar with the Judeo-Christian biblical version of the flood myth, the story of Noah's Ark in Genesis. In this version, there is also mention that us humans began to multiply on the earth. This version shows a singular God who expresses much regret in the fact that he made humans. This God was pretty disgusted with the violence and corruption that was happening on earth and wanted to exterminate us, much like the gods in the Sumerian clay tablets. Noah was in good favor with this God who warned Noah and also gave him direction on what to do, much like Enki did for the priest. Many anthropologists will tell you that a myth is often the faded memory of a real event. When it comes to myths, there might have been details added or lost or obscured in the telling and retelling of these stories, but a kernel of truth usually still remains. When two or more separate cultures have the same myth in their body of folklore, their ancestors must have either experienced the same event or they both descended from a common ancestral source that experienced the same event. Now, I would say that most scientists do not recognize the Great Flood story as a historical fact on a global scale. However, it's not a completely discounted theory either. There is definitely evidence that a big flood occurred. We know that there were some quite volatile time periods that took place on our planet with intense climate change, such as the Younger Dryas period. Because these myths are a part of so many different cultures, there is a possibility that these myths could be remnants of an actual historical event. In order for us earthlings to know who we are, it is definitely helpful for us to try and understand where we come from. Now, whether this flood was caused by a natural disaster or by a god or gods who became exasperated with us for some reason would be very difficult to prove. Regardless, it doesn't seem logical to think that it is a coincidence so many cultures throughout so many different time periods have the same myth. Mainstream scientists often quickly discard things as fantasy since concrete evidence cannot be calculated. But regardless of whether these stories are factual or not, these flood stories are still stories that were left to us by our ancestors. The story is still very much alive in our collective consciousness and is a story that has survived thousands and thousands of years. The Great Flood story is often tied to the Judeo-Christian faith, but there are countless cultures such as the Chinese, the Greeks, Islamic, Mayans, East Indians, and countless native tribes that all have flood stories as well. This story was left for all of us as an earthling species, regardless of our individual interpretations. If a cataclysmic type event hit our Earth and only a few of us survived, what would you do to make sure certain information was passed down to future generations as you helped repopulate the Earth? A lot of scientists like to say that ancient humans created these types of stories to help explain events that they were not able to understand. So in this case, even if there was a natural disaster that created a flood that wiped out most of the planet, creating a story about an angry god or gods would help these ancient humans make sense of the event. This assumes that ancient humans were quite ignorant, lacking any real sense on topics such as natural disasters. I personally have a hard time believing that argument for many reasons. Even if this were the case, I find it uncharacteristically coincidental that all of these different cultures would still have the same story. So, what do you think about this ancient flood story that has been left and preserved for us earthlings? Were we created by a god or group of gods only to disappoint them, resulting in the attempted extermination by the god or gods that created us? Now, keep in mind the term God or gods can refer to higher level beings rather than the supreme God or great spirit or the great I am. I think this is where people tend to get hung up on. Or maybe these flood stories are just an ancient version of the parental argument. I brought you into this earth and I can also take you out. Maybe this story wasn't meant to be taken seriously. Maybe it was. Regardless, this is an important story left to us by our ancestors. Even if there's only a kernel of truth left in this myth, there is a possibility that all of us earthlings living today, even though we are separated geographically, linguistically, and culturally, are all descendants from the few real people who survived a real global flood. Have a good week.